Whose job is it to tell us where we are in the business cycle? That's going to be the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research. It's a very nice place for you guys to go ahead and work if you ever want to stare at a computer screen for 10 hours a day. They'll gladly pay you 6 figures to do so. So if you're looking for a job, this is an organization that you probably want to go ahead and apply for. And the NBER, they basically hire all these research associates and assistants, and they go ahead and sift through all the economic data that is available to them. It's going to be hundreds of thousands and millions of data points. They take a look at unemployment data, inflation data, income data, housing data, the stock market. They have all these data points, and it's their job to tell us exactly what the data is saying in terms of the economy. And they look for these particular turning points, the points at which the economy switches from peak to downturn or from trough to recovery. So essentially when the business cycles are going to go from one phase into the next phase. And that's what the data is going to be sort of signaling to them. And once they actually have all this data, they're going to present their report to a sort of consensus of eminent economists, and these eminent economists are going to take a look at all the data, all the research, and they basically say to themselves, yes, we are in the peak phase of the business cycle, or yes, we are heading straight into a recession or into a downturn. And it's a little bit of a sort of controversy in terms of these eminent economists because they do not actually allow their methodologies known to the public. So the economists, they only talk to one another in private, and once they basically make their decision, they just tell us exactly that we are in the United States at this phase of the business cycle. It's also a little bit unusual that they actually can't tell us exactly where we are in the business cycle at this given moment. And the reason for that is because the data that the NBER associates take a look at, they are not up to date. They're not very current. They only get data from the past few months. So we're always working with some type of lag period of data because it's actually very, very expensive and very, very difficult to track current data. It takes millions and millions of dollars to get data that is current as of today. So which is why they always work with maybe a 1 month, 2 month, or even a 3 month lag when it comes to a lot of the data. And we'll take a closer look at these sort of lags in the next few chapters, especially when it comes to unemployment and inflation. So we can't tell us exactly what inflation is right now. We always work with at least a month's worth of lags due to the sort of expenses associated with tracking all this data. So here, basically the economists tell us that maybe 1 month ago or maybe 1 quarter ago, this is where the United States was in terms of the business cycle. So something to keep in mind as you listen to the news stories and get a little bit of a better idea about economic intuition. And there are a few specific things that we want to know about the NBER and a few of the things that they tell us about the business cycle itself. So how do you think the NBER formally tells us that we have entered into a recession? In order to say that the United States has formally entered into a recession, we actually need to have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So if the data tells us that we have negative GDP growth in quarter number 1, and in the next quarter we have negative GDP growth as well, the NBER formally declares that the United States has entered into a recession. So here, this is the most formal way to tell whether or not any one country is entering into a recession or not. If it's negative 1 quarter, if it's negative 1 quarter but positive the next quarter, we can't really say that we are in a recession, at least according to NBER standards. It has to be 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. And one final thing about the business cycle, one unusual event that may happen is something known as a double dip recession. And a double dip recession occurs when a recovering economy does not reach its former peak. So as we go through the phases of the business cycle, we hit a peak, we enter into a recession, hit the trough, and go straight into the recovery. If the next peak that we hit doesn't reach the height of the former peak, and it goes straight into another recession, then we denote that this is a double dip recession. And you might think that these double dip recessions are fairly common events, but they're actually pretty uncommon. The last one occurring in the United States in the period 1980 to 1982, which is why this was a little bit more of an intense sort of recession, an intense type of business cycle. There were fears that the past financial recession in the late 2000s, the Great Recession as they sort of called it, would turn into a double dip recession, but fortunately those fears were unfounded because if we did have a double dip recession, we would be in a very bad economic time. So thankfully it did not turn into a double dip recession. So in terms of recessions, not only are we interested in seeing when we enter into a recession, we are also a little bit interested in predicting when recessions might actually happen. So here, when we're in a peak or when we're in this particular phase of the business cycle, can we predict when a particular recession may happen. We're going to take a look at the 3 specific tools that the United States has at its disposal to predict when recessions could happen in the next lecture video.